Hey guys, this week we are continuing our discussion about triads, and we're going to be talking about naming triads and telling whether they are major, which sounds happy, or minor, which tends to sound sad. So let's jump right in. One of the most common types of triads is the major triad. You'll recognize the major triad because it sounds pretty happy. It's also our classic do, mi, sol, mi, do. The way that we're going to decide if a triad is in fact major is by looking at what kinds of thirds make it up. So what I mean by that is we're going to see what kind of third the root to the third of the chord is, and then what kind of third the third of the chord to the fifth of the chord is. And that's going to tell us the quality of the triad. So I've got my keyboard out, and we're going to look at the bottom third first. So that's from the root of the chord to the third of the chord. In this case, the root of our chord is G, and the third of our chord is B. So then to figure out what type of third that is, remember we're going to count our half steps. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you think all the way back to our unit on intervals, 4 half steps tells us that this is a major third. Next we're going to look at the top third. And by the top third, I mean the one that goes from the third of the chord to the fifth of the chord. In this particular example, our third of the chord is B, and our fifth of the chord is D. So again, we're going to count our half steps. 1, 2, 3. And you'll of course recall that 3 half steps makes this a minor third. Now we can see that we have a major third on the bottom and a minor third on the top. That's going to be true for any major triad. So you could start on C or E flat or any note, and you would always have a major third on the bottom between the root and the third, and a minor third on top between the third and the fifth. That's going to go for all major triads. The other common type of triad is a minor triad, and that's going to have a different pattern of thirds that make it up. So let's get out our keyboard again, and we are going to figure out whether these thirds are major or minor. So again, we're going to start with the bottom third, which goes from the root to the third of the chord. And again, in this example, our root is G, but this time our third of the chord is B flat. So remember, you always have to be super careful to include your accidentals when you're looking at a triad. So we're going to count our half steps. 1, 2, 3. And that tells us that this is a minor third. Now let's look at our top third, which is going to go from the third of the chord to the fifth of the chord. In this example, again, our third of the chord is B flat, and our fifth of the chord is D. So we'll count our half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 half steps from the bottom note to the top note tells us that it's a major third. So you'll see that the minor triad is the exact opposite of our major triad. Here we have a minor third on the bottom and a major third on the top. So that's going to be true of all minor triads. They're always going to have a minor third on the bottom and a major third on the top. If I wanted to name a triad, I have to be a little bit more specific than just the quality of the triad. I need to give it a note name as well. And you might recall that we spent a lot of time last week talking about how to find the root of the chord. And the reason we did that is because the root of the chord is always going to tell us what triad it is. So in this case, our root of the chord is A flat. And that tells us that this is an A flat triad. So when you name a triad, the first step is always going to be to find the root of the chord and write it down. And notice that I'm including the flat. That's super important. This is not an A triad, this is an A flat triad. But I can't just leave the name at A flat because it's not specific enough. This could be an A flat major triad, it could be an A flat minor triad, we don't know until we do step 2, which is to determine the quality of the triad. So remember, to do that, we're going to look at what kind of thirds make up this triad. We're going to start by looking at the bottom third. So that's from A flat to C, between the root of the chord and the third of the chord. So here's our A flat, here's our C. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that tells us this is a major third. And then we're going to check the top third. So that's between the third and the fifth. So between C and E flat. And we're going to count our half steps again. 1, 2, 3. So that tells us this is a minor third. And now we have to look at this and think, which pattern is this? Is this the major triad pattern or is it the minor triad pattern? An easy way to remember the difference is that a major triad always has a major third on the bottom, and a minor triad always has a minor third on the bottom. So this triad has a major third on the bottom, so that tells us that it must be a major triad. So this is the A flat major triad. And to name that, we're always going to include this abbreviation MAJ after the name of the root. So A flat was our root, it's a major triad, A flat major. Some of you may have learned other systems for naming the triads, but for the sake of clarity in this class, we're always going to use the 3-letter abbreviations. So MAJ for major and MIN for minor. Let's take a look at another example. So remember that our first step is to find the root of the chord. We are lucky that this one is in root position, so that's pretty easy to find the root of the chord. It's this bottom one, C sharp. So we're going to go ahead and write that much down. Then the next step is to figure out what kind of triad is this. And we do that by looking at the thirds. So we're going to look at the bottom third first, from C sharp to E. We're going to count half steps. 1, 2, 3. This is a minor third. And then we're going to go from E to G sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is major. So that is in keeping with the pattern for a minor triad. So we're going to write our 3-letter abbreviation. C sharp minor is the name of this triad. But what should I do when I see a triad that's not in root position? How can I name it? Well, the easiest way to go about doing that is actually to rewrite it in root position. So you'll remember from last week that the way that we're going to do that is by moving the top note down until we have 3 notes that are all either spaces or lines, not a mix of both, which is what we currently have. So we're going to move that top A down and then just add the other 2 notes, and ta-da, we have 3 spaces, which is our indicator that we're back in root position. So now we can go on to the same steps from before for naming this triad. So the first step is to find the root. And now that we have it in root position, that's pretty easy. It's just the bottom note in root position. So that's A in this case. So we're going to put an A down here. And then the next step is to determine the quality of the triad. So I'm going to need to get out my keyboard because that's going to help me determine what types of thirds these are. So the root of our chord is A, and the third of our chord is C sharp. So we're going to count our half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. That tells us that this bottom third is major. Then we're going to go from the third of the chord, C sharp, up to E. Counting our half steps, E is the fifth of the chord. 1, 2, 3. So that tells us that this third is a minor third. And as we are now becoming familiar, this is the pattern for a major triad. So I'm going to finish the name of my triad down here, A major. In the homework, you might also be asked to name the position that the triad is in. And that is referring to this original position, not the root position that we had to rewrite in order to figure out the name of the triad. So if I want to know what position this triad is in, all I have to do is count how many notes we had to move in order to get back to root position. So in this case, we just moved the A down and we were in root position. So that's one note that had to move, which tells us that we were in first inversion. Let's take a look at another example of a triad not in root position. So the first thing we have to do is make it root position. So we're going to move that top note down by an octave. So we've got G, B, E. Oops, we still have a mix of lines and spaces. So we're going to move one more note down an octave, so that E is going to come down. And then we've got the other two, G, B. Ta-da! All three notes are on the line this time. So now we know we're in root position again, and we can start naming our triad. So first we need to find the root, and now that we're in root position, that's easy. It's this bottom note, which is E. So we're going to write E. Then we're going to get out our keyboard, and that is going to help us figure out the quality of the thirds in this triad. So the root of the chord is E, and the third of the chord is G. So 1, 2, 3. This is a minor third. Then from the third of the chord G to the fifth of the chord B, we're going to count half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a major third. And we now know that that is the pattern for a minor triad with a minor third on the bottom and a major third on the top. So I'm going to finish the name of this triad, E minor. And then if I wanted to know what position this original triad was in, I would just need to count how many notes we needed to move to get to root position. So we moved one note, G. We still weren't in root position, so we moved a second note, E, and then we were in root position. So 2 notes had to move to get back to root position, which tells us we were in second inversion. Again, just a reminder that I'm always going to use this 3-letter abbreviation, MIN for minor or MAJ for major, whenever I'm naming my triads. And that's all for this week, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them, and I will see you next time.